Okay, so this book is one that I just bought called Nobody's Angel, and as you can see, I got it from Half Price Books, which is a bookstore. They have different locations. It's kind of like discount books. So this is from, so it's Nobody's Angel by Thomas McGuane, and it's a pretty well-known old book. And it was actually written so first vintage books edition, November of 1986. Copyright is 1979. And then the author photograph. This in specific, they have different, I noticed that this book has different covers. So this specific cover is, was for the 1984 edition, or rather, I guess, release, publish. And I heard about this book. It was featured kind of in the shot of one of the scenes of the movie Home Alone with the late Catherine O'Hara, and and of course Macaulay Culkin. So the dad was reading this book, but it was the old original cover picture, not this one. So anywho, so it is about a cowboy basically struggling with his his life and his drinking issue, and so I thought this would be another one. Interesting read. So, chapter 1. You have had to care about the country. Nobody had been here long enough, and the Indians had been very thoroughly kicked out. It would take a shovel to find they'd ever been here. And the grasslands that looked so world, so cowlicked from overhead were the ranches. And some of these ranches were run by men who thought like farmers, and who usually had wives twice their size. The others were run by men who thought like cowboys, and whose wives, more often than not, were their own size or smaller, sometimes quite tiny. The farmer operations were good mechanics and packed the protein off the land. The cowboys had maybe a truck and some saddle horses, and statistics indicate that they had unhealthy dependency on whiskey. They were not necessarily violent, nor necessarily uneducated. Their women didn't talk in the tiny baby voices of the farmer operator wives, nor in the beautician rasp of the town wives. The cowboys have gotten here last week or just after the Civil War, and they seemed to believe in what they were doing, though they were often very lazy white men. The town in the middle of the place was called Dead Rock, a modest place of 10,000 souls, originally named for an unresolved battle between the army and the Assiniboine Deadlock, but renamed Dead Rock out of some sad and irresolute rheumatism meant to cure an early day depression. To many people, Dead Rock was exactly the right name, and in any case it stuck. It was soon to be a major postcard. Patrick Fitzpatrick lived on a ranch 31 miles outside the town. He was fourth-generation cowboy, outsider, an educated man, a whiskey addict, and, until recently, a professional soldier. He was 36 years old. He was in good shape, needed some crown work, but that was about it. So you'll see the chapters are quite short. The yard lay erect upon its wood shone through down a yellow faltering glow, infinitely chromatic, falling through the china willow to the ground, pounded up against the house by the unrepentantly useless horses. Patrick Fitzpatrick glided under the low branches on his mare as the band circled into the corral for salt and grain and water and the morning's inspection for cracked hooves, lameness, splints, bowed tendons, lice, warbles, wire cuts, ulcerated eyes, wolf teeth, spavin, gravel, founder, and worms. Near the light's edge, the dogs watched him pass. Cole Younger, yellow, on his back, all four legs dangling, let his eyeballs fall open upside down. Alba, black in the subshadow of mountain ash, ready to run. Zip T. Crow, brindle, jaw right on parallel front legs, considered starting a stampede with his hyena voice. Thinking finally of the consequences, he fell to dreaming of the last horse, a yearling running at an angle. Jog trotted into the corral, drinking the creek alongside the other shadowy horses deployed as regularly as picket line. Zip-T Crow sunk over behind some relic of a walking cultivator and dropped into his confused shadows like a shy insurrectionist. This was the day to ride up into the airplane. 3. In early spring, before the creeks flooded, before the first bridges washed away and the big river turned dark, before the snow was gone from the rugged shadows and the drowned livestock tumbled up in the bushy banks, Patrick found the airplane with his binoculars, a single-ribbed glimmer of fuselage, visible a matter of hours before the next flurry concealed it for another month, but not before Patrick had memorized the deep blue ultramontage declivity of the top of the fearsome mountain and began speculating if maybe he could get a horse through the last 10,000 yards of deadfall and look into the pilot's eyes. Patrick's son was the son of a dead pilot. Then in May, Patrick walked up the endless sloping nose and saw the pilot quite clearly. He climbed past him to get the co-pilot's seat and found fractured portions of granite, parts of the mountain that had poured like grape shot through the fuselage clear into the tail section, leaving the co-pilot in innumerable pieces. Those pieces gusseted in olive nylon, and the skin of the aircraft blood sprayed as in a cult massacre, further apt in the tampering shape where the beating sprung sun shone on the skin of the plane and where viscera trailed off into straps, fastening in instruments it sank. Arms raised in uniform, the pilot seemed the impact of a man, image of a man in receipt of a fatal sacrament. The oxygen hose was torn away, and beyond the knot fold of G, Patrick could see this mare grazing in the alpine slope, unable to differentiate flesh from electronics. He was avoiding the long-held notion that his father had died like a comet, igniting in the atmosphere an archangelic semaphone more dignified than death itself. For Patrick, a year had begun, and the inside of the plane showed him that life doesn't always drag on. 4. Patrick left the sidewalk through the door between the two angled windows. It was cold, but when he hung his coat inside and glanced onto the street, it looked like summer, purest optics. There was a stock truck parked at the hotel with two saddled horses in back, facing opposite directions. Many saddle horses spent the day parked in the front of the bar, heads hung in sleep. Can't get a good help anymore, Patrick thought. Even if you could, who wants to tell people what to do? 2 steps at the poker table was an old man with a diamond willow cane pushing chips onto the green felt. There was a belt and setter at his feet. 2 strangers and a girl dealing cards. Not strangers, but he couldn't remember their names. Afternoon, Patrick, said the old man, whose name was Carson. That was his first name. One stranger said, "Hello, Captain." Patrick had been in the army, and the other said, "How's the man?" Classmates with forgotten faces, but Patrick was rather graceful under these conditions, and by the time he'd gone through the room, the setter was asleep again. The players were smiling, and the girl dealing was reading his name off the back of his belt. The bar was nearly empty, populated solely by that handful of citizens who can drink in the face of the sun blazing through the windows. Patrick ordered his whiskey, knocked it back, and reconnoitered. Whiskey, he thought, head upstairs and do some good. He called, "Thanks so much," to the bar girl, put down his money, and left. It was hard to leave a place where God was at bay. He walked all the way to the front of the main, straight toward the mountain range, crossed the little bridge over the clear overflow ditch, and went into the prefabricated home without knocking. The windows were covered with shades, and once his eyes accustomed themselves to the poor light, he could see the prostitutes on the couch watching an intelligent interview show, the kind in which Mr. Interlocutor was playing, plainly on amphetamines, while his subjects move in grotesque slow motion. They were dealing with the fetus right to life. On the panel were four abortionists, five anti-abortionists, and a livid nun with the temper of an aging welterweight. "Hello, girls." "Hello, Patrick." "No game on?" "College basketball." "We're watching this fetus deal." "Anybody make a profit?" "Loretta did." Loretta, the vital brunette with tangled hair and a strong, clean body, beamed. She said, "Trout fisherman." "Doctors, I think." One had a pen light. He said he always checked relations. I said, "Glad." He said, among other things. I said, 4 to 10 day incubation. He says, "Which book are you reading?" I said, "I don't read books. I watch TV." So he gets in there with his pen light. I could have swatted him. "Free checkup," said Patrick. "Look at the good side of things." "Who's winning?" Loretta asked. She came from Dead Rock, looked like a nice firm girl. Deirdre from Great Falls, always literal, said, "The fetus." This nun was packing the mail. Patrick asked if they were betting. They said no. He said that he was Catholic. He would kick in the set if the fetus lost. "There's a Catholic," said Tana, as the camera isolated the apologetic nun shouting the word "sacred." "I've seen better ones," said Patrick. "Well, there's one is all," she said dodgingly. Andrea, the young, bright blonde, was from the High Line. She said, "I was with this rancher on his place. He wanted to go again. All the lights went out. I said, 'That's rural electrification for you.' He said, 'That's Montana power.' I said, 'Well, I can't see nothing.' He said, 'It's the hydroelectric. It comes off the grid, out of Columbia Falls.' So I said, 'What's the deal? Do we go again?' I said, 'Not if I can't see.' And just then, like God was on my side, the power came back on, and I doubled down for $50. Thank you, Montana Power. Thank you, Columbia Falls." "Jesus," Patrick said, "that nun is going to blow her stack." She said. He was staring at the screen. "She's no help to the fetus team," said Loretta. The moderator kept saying, "Sister, sister," but nothing could slow her tirade, which continued to feature the word "sacred" repeated at high volume. "I'm glad I don't have any money on this one," said Patrick. Andrew got up and went to the kitchen to make iced tea. Loretta from Dead Rock had gone to grammar school with Patrick, had been a medical secretary, then been not quite happy with that and tried prostitution, a respected job in Montana because of its long utility during the settlement of that region. Loretta's rural good looks made her prosper, particularly among visiting sportsmen. Deirdre from Great Falls said, "That nun could use my shadow." Deirdre was best with closing time stumblebums. Patrick asked Loretta if he could have a word with her privately. The two went into the kitchen as Patrick fought back a little tingle. Loretta hiked herself up on the counter, and Patrick sat in the ladder back chair. There were coffee cans on a low shelf, each labeled with one of the girls' names, and in front of every can was a kitchen timer. The cans held each night's earnings, and the clocks foiled dauntingly or inappropriate enthusiasm. Loretta, said Patrick, you're prettier than you were at homecoming. Only an officer. She'd actually gone downhill. I've got a better life now. When did you get back? Not too long ago. In the winter. You home to stay? Trying to be. It'll depend on what I can get going. We're still running pairs, and I've got a few outside horses to break, if I can remember how. I guess my grandfather has just had to pick up whoever he could, so a lot of things had to go by the downhill. He had one Indian for quite a while. Supposed to have been a good hand. What Indian? He was, a friend of Mary's. The way he had. Mary was Patrick's sister. Well, Mary is why I'm here. What's the trouble? No trouble. I just can't find her. I thought you might know. She just got out of this work a long time ago, Pat. The Indian is the best way to find her, I know. He was supposed to be real different. Used to shark pool at the corral. Just take everybody's money and never say a word. An Indian. Well, I'm not going to hunt her down or anything, but if you see her, tell her I'm home. Sure will. Boy, you look good, Loretta. More. She put her it-girl smile and spun her toes. Patrick walked over to the can labeled Loretta, wound the clock in front of it, and turned it loose real slow. Gives a vicarious thrill, he said. She waved as he went out the door into the sunlight that bounced from the high walls of granite around the town. So if you want, I'll continue reading this one, because it is quite a read. So I'll see you in the next one.